Hey everybody, welcome back to the What is Money show. I am sitting down today with Dea Rezkitha, who is the founder of Kelas Bitcoin and Indonesia Bitcoin community. And today is a special episode. So Dea and I met actually when I was in Indonesia, I guess about a year ago.
Yeah.
And I appeared on your podcast. We did a session together. And then recently we had this idea, it was actually suggested by Sailor, that we do a what is money evaluation per country. So we're going to start looking like the actual state of money, the problems with money, et cetera, within each country. And thought it would be a great idea to have you on as our first guest and look at Indonesia. So Dea, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Robert. Happy to talk to you again. It's been a while, and it's actually quite an honor to share Indonesia's story, because I think not many people knows about Indonesia, especially Indonesia money history. Even me, when I'm doing this whole research, I found like so many fascinating stories. So yeah, happy to share.
That's wonderful. Yeah, I've found that when you start looking at world history and just follow the money, right? You see
Yeah.
a lot of interesting things, let's say. So you've done a lot of work preparing for this, which I'm really grateful for. We're going to get into all of that. But I guess to start off, maybe you could just tell us a little bit about Kelas Bitcoin and the Indonesia Bitcoin community and the work you guys are doing over there.
Sure. Yeah, so Kelas Bitcoin is actually just a bunch of resource for Indonesian to learn about Bitcoin, because the biggest problem for adoption, I think, around the world is language barrier. A lot of Indonesian doesn't really speak. They speak English, but it's not that good. And there's a lot of great content out there in English. So we try to translate that and then make it more Indonesia-centric. And also Indonesia Bitcoin community is some kind of a association or a community that we just recently established, because we see that there is a need of some kind of a community around Bitcoin, because Indonesia is quite large country, and then they need to have someone that they can talk to about Bitcoin. So we run meetups. We also do like weekly, let's say, on-chain analysis, or like analysis of the Bitcoin. What is the news? And we also run the first Bitcoin conference, where you were also one of the speaker, and it was sold out with 1,000 people attending it. So yeah, we're gonna do more of it in the upcoming years.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you for doing that. And it's important to teach people about this, because it's just a blind spot for most people. We use and think through money all the time, but we very rarely stop to think about money itself. So thank you for what you're doing. I'm excited to get into this. So I know you mentioned offline you've been reading Ray Dalio's new book, and you're sort of thinking about the world through that lens of the changing world order. And I imagine today we're going to talk a bit about how Indonesia fits into the current changing world order. So where should we start this journey today?
Yeah, I think like maybe we can start from Ray Dalio's framework of the big cycle, because as we know right now, in the past, I don't know, since the 16th centuries up until now, the world order has been shifted. Start from the Dutch world order. I mean, the Dutch as the world reserve currency, and then the British as the world reserve currency. And currently, right now, we are in the US dollars reserve currency, right? And all of this cycle is actually, like there's like some kind of an arc where Ray Dalio pointed out in their big cycle. So maybe first we can talk about the arc itself. So according to Ray Dalio, there is like each of the empire gone through this journey, which is the ascending. They go into the peak and then decline. So when they are like ascending, this is when they start establishing like a new world order, and then there's like a period of peace and prosperity. And then it's basically focusing on the high productivity. Like there's a new technology, or even they become like one of the biggest financial center and a strong currency as well. This is where most of all of this world empire started. Like they start with like this ascending, and then once they become productive and they generate a lot of income, and when they have more earning, this is when they start become less competitive because they become more expensive. This is when they reach the peak where people are working less, and then they create less. They produce less, so less productivity. And by what happened is, because they become the world reserve currency, they have the privilege that they can borrow more money. And this can be like a double-edged sword. When they borrow more money, means that they can also get into more debt. And when the debt is become large, one side there's like a larger inequality, large wealth gap, and then the empire become too expensive to support, and then it's just gonna going to a decline, where this is start happening when the empire needs to pay their debt, and it's a difficult decision, right? Like when the debt needs to be paid, sometimes central banks cannot stimulate the economy. Even if they print more money, they cannot stabilize the economy. And because of this, a lot of like wealthy people put their money into like assets, so then there will be less tax, and because of less tax, there is even larger wealth gap. And then then the result is like politic extremism, like people goes against the like rich people. When this happen, sometimes the new world order is gonna arise from here. Like if they cannot move up, if they cannot figuring out how they can finance themselves and then pay their debt, then there will be like a new world order. Because when the new world order come, this is when they restructure their debt. So this is like most of the cycle that most of the empire already gone through, from the Dutch Empire, from the British Empire. And right now we are currently witnessing the decline of the US empire, if we can say. So this is very interesting. And why I use this framework is because Indonesia is somehow stuck between this changing of this world order. And I think it's also applied for other countries as well. So I think we can start from there first. Yeah,
it's a wonderful introduction. Thank you for that. I'm going to read this. We have this visual in front of us, which I guess is from Ray Dalio's book. And it's the arc you're describing. And he titled this visual, "The Typical Big Cycle Behind Empires, Rises and Declines." And on the ascent, you have the beginning of the New World Order, followed by peace, prosperity, productive debt growth, followed by debt bubble and big wealth gap, which gets you up to the peak of the arc. Then it begins its descent, going into the debt bust and economic downturn, printing money and credit, revolutions and wars, debt and political restructuring, and finally bottoming out in a new world order, and the cycle repeats.
Yeah.
So I would presume we're somewhere in the printing money and credit stage. And it seems like definitely a revolution of sorts is fomenting on multiple fronts. So it's interesting that these things they're so inextricably linked, right? This relationship of money and credit to the actual boom and bust of global empire.
Yeah, definitely. And most of the the transition between world order always result in war. Like in the Dutch Empire, it's there was like the Anglo-Dutch War that happened for a time, and then the Dutch actually got defeated, and then British become the main power. And then from the British Empire to the US Empire, it was the World War II. Yeah, World War I and World War II. So I don't know, maybe we are in the COVID war. I'm not sure. But yeah, it's I think it's interesting because Ray Dalio also said that, I mean, there's also a saying, right? Like history is not similar, but like they rhyme or something like that. Like
right. It doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And what I also like from his framework is just just see the perspective from the country itself, not to point out who is the villain, who are the hero, because I think like someone like a hero is someone else villain, and then a villain is someone else hero. So
right.
I just want to like talk about this in a more just to see what they think at that time is best, and why like what is the consequences of the action.
Yeah, no, that's a great way to look at it. And I think there is this tendency to want to have an us versus them outlook on the world, especially when things are chaotic and uncertain. You know, you think like, oh, how could they do that to us? But it's much more complicated than that, right? It's not just black or white. And that's why I think it's more useful to follow the incentives and follow the money. You actually see what was motivating people in any given set of circumstances, and how those motivations change over time as the money changes, the economy changes, or power structures. So very useful way to look at it. So should we go into then the significance of Indonesia in the world today?
Yeah, sure. And I think, from these different empires, I think Indonesia is quite significant, even though I think a lot of people doesn't really know much about Indonesia. A part of like there's a bunch of islands somewhere in in this between Australia and then Thailand or something like that, which is funny because Indonesia actually back in the day is quite like important place, because they like there are a lot of kingdoms, and also a lot of people trade in this area, because Indonesia have a lot of natural resources, a lot of spices and commodities that is actually being like people actually look for that type of commodities, like rubber or coffee, clove, nutmeg. These are the things that luxurious back in the days, and Indonesia is rich of these resources. And Indonesia is actually quite a vast. How do you say it? Vast country.
Yeah.
Vast.
Yeah.
Sorry, vast country. If you see the size of Indonesia, it's actually bigger than the United States. If you compare the Indonesia size with European, it's like stretched from Ireland down to Uzbekistan. So it's actually really large. Yeah. It become like a trading port. So a lot of people back in the day, the Arabs, the Chinese, they come to Indonesia for trading, right? And Indonesia also before, like they quite rich area, because before it was started as like a little kingdoms everywhere in Indonesia, and this kingdom, they rule up until Philippines, until Cambodia and Thailand. So the kingdom called Majapahit, and everyone knows that Majapahit is quite a rich kingdom, because the let's say the soldier were like adorned with gold armory, and like every palace, like with a lot of gold. And even up until now, there is a gold hunter. Like they go to like ancient site of Majapahit, and then they still find gold, and it's they are like a gold hunter in here. But funny enough, like the kingdom collapsed because even though they have a lot of gold, and then they have this ambition that they want to conquer a lot of land, conquer a lot of area. So they decided to debase their currency, I guess, like from having a gold coin, they imported a tin coin from Mongolia, from China. And because of this is considered like cheaper money than gold, and a lot of fake money is being circulated in Majapahit around that time. So not long the kingdom collapsed after that. But anyway, that's like, I think, like the beginning of a currency debasement in Indonesia. So like Indonesia, knowing that it has a lot of natural resources, the location, the size, and also Indonesia owns 17,000 islands, so it's actually quite unique from one another.
17,000.
17,000 islands.
Wow, that's incredible.
So if you go to like one island every day, I don't know how many years would you take to visit all of this island?
It'd be like 45 years or something. Wait, every day? Wait, every day? No, never mind. That's less. That's 4.5 years, I guess.
Maybe.
I don't know. I'll have to check
the math. But it's actually, it takes a long time for you to visit all the island. Yeah. So anyway, like because of this natural resources, a lot of trader comes to Indonesia. So especially European, right? Like nutmegs, clove, cardamom. This kind of thing is luxurious. Before you guys only have salt. And salt is not exciting for food, I guess. So they the Spanish, the Portuguese actually come to Indonesia to trade, and then sell their like the spices to European. And then Dutch has this idea, like they want to compete with Spanish and the Portuguese. They want to monopolize the East Indies trade. And the way they go about it is that they collect all of the small enterprise that used to sail to this new world, I guess, like the East Indies area, and they collect them, and then they combine it together into what is called the Verenigde Oost-Indische Company, or VOC, or in English is the Dutch East Indies. And it's very interesting because this is the first publicly traded company, and people actually can buy some share of the ship, and then they create a stock market around this. So actually, the VOC birthed capitalism.
Right.
Capitalism in a sense of like getting capital from public, and then creating like a stock market, etc. So
that's exactly right. The first joint stock company and risk sharing mechanism, so we could participate in larger enterprises, basically.
Exactly. And they have like what is called also fractional share. So you don't need to buy the entire ship. Like people can buy 1/10 of the ship, So like if the ship suddenly sank somewhere in Indonesian Ocean, people don't lose that much money. But it's very interesting because everyone in I think in the at that time the Netherlands, like they are kind of used to buying bonds. So like the market, the financial market is actually booming in the Netherlands, and VOC is one of the companies that got a lot of funding. And if we evaluate the VOC on today's money, it's even bigger than Apple or Google. Like it's if I'm not mistaken, is like with the value of $8 trillion today.
Wow.
So
Crazy.
yeah, it's crazy. Back in the day, like, it's kind of crazy. And so because of this advantage, VOC are able to create like a lot of ship. They have more leverage than, let's say, the Spanish or the Portuguese. So they able to build a lot of trading posts around Indonesia and then also around the world. But the difference between VOC and let's say the Spanish or the Portuguese, the VOC got what is called like a special rights, like an octroi. So the VOC has a right to mint their own coin in the place where they are settled, and then they can have the rights to negotiate any agreements, rights to have its own military, rights to wage a war. So they are essentially like its own country within the Dutch Empire. Because like back in the day, it's so hard to like communicate with the Dutch. You have to wait a year probably to ask for something. So then the Dutch Empire said like, okay, you guys do your own. What we need from you is that you come back with commodities and goods and bring us a lot of money.
Yeah. Wow.
So yeah, it's very interesting. And they settle their own capital in Batavia, which is currently Jakarta in Indonesia. So VOC is like its own little satellite countries.
Hey, everybody. As you've no doubt learned by watching this show, Bitcoin is the single most important asset you can own in the 21st century. And one of the most important companies in Bitcoin today is NYDIG. NYDIG's mission is to get Bitcoin into the hands of as many people as possible. One of the ways they are accomplishing this mission is by empowering banks and financial technology companies to offer their own Bitcoin products and services. As a true game changer in the industry, NYDIG is safely unlocking the power of Bitcoin for forward-thinking individuals and institutions alike. Led by Robbie Gutman, Yin Zhao, and Ross Stevens, NYDIG has absolutely exploded onto the Bitcoin scene recently and has quickly become a leader in this space. So, whether you are a professional investor looking for asset management services or a company looking to white label your own Bitcoin product or service, consider NYDIG your single source solution for everything Bitcoin. VOC had special rights called the octroi, which effectively made them their own sovereign nation, right? They could mint their own money. They could negotiate agreements with locals. They had rights to their own military and rights to wage war. So essentially this inaugural capitalistic institution, like the first joint stock company, became its own sovereign power.
Yeah, it's a bit crazy. It's like, imagine like Facebook
Exactly.
can wage a war.
Yeah.
So it's quite interesting, because that's why, like in Indonesia, whenever back in the day when we call, let's say, foreigner, we call them company. And I always think like, what is company? Oh, it's a big company that is currently in Indonesia. And it's also interesting. So the reason why the VOC has this right to mint their own coin, because back in the day, Indonesia people, like, there are some kingdom who owns their own coin, but a lot of people just do barter, because, there's a lot of abundant resources. You don't really need to probably own money. So then the Dutch introduced their guilder, which is made out of silver. They import all of this guilder to Indonesia. And the Dutch has a hope that Indonesia will use it among themselves, and then also between the Indonesian and the Dutch. But because Indonesia is a trading port, so whenever the Dutch gave them the guilder, Indonesia buys something from the Arabs, and then the guilder is being gave away to the Arabs or to the Chinese. So they become frustrated because it's silver, right? Like back in the day, silver is like quite a rare commodities. So then they decided to mint their own coin that is made out of tin called doit. And this is where in Indonesia we call money doit, and do it until now doit. Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
I just wanted to chime in here that 17,000 islands, visiting one island per day will take you 46 and a half years.
Yes. So that can be a retirement plan to visit one island.
That's a long retirement.
Yeah. So continue on. So VOC has these rights, right? And then they basically able to monopolize the East Indies trade. So pushing the Spanish to Philippines and Portuguese to East Timor, and now they own like most of Indonesia. And VOC is also actually quite a brilliant company because they have these different trading ports around the world. So instead of like just getting all of the commodities from Indonesia and then sending it to Europe, they kind of trade between different countries where they have their own ports. So for example, like we have clove in Indonesia, so they trade with China, and then China gave them silk, and then they trade that silk to Japan, and where they get like porcelain and etc. So by the time they arrive in the Europe, they actually able to to sell these luxurious commodities, like a rare luxurious commodity that way much profitable than just selling clothes. So they become really rich company, but because they are rich, and then they are sponsored by the government. Of course, there's a lot of corruption happening, and then there is also the Anglo-Dutch War, because this is where the British wants to compete with the Dutch, because at that time Dutch become the world reserve currency, and the British also they copied the Dutch Navy ships technology. So now they come into a war between each other.
Right.
So the VOC lost a lot of money, and then even the government tried to bail them out. And because the government tried to bail them out, there's a lot of distrust in the society, in the Dutch society at that time. There's a run on banks, on Bank of Amsterdam. So finally, the VOC by the late 17th century, they went bankrupt. So it's actually quite long, maybe like almost 2 centuries. These VOCs actually been running. So what happened then? The Dutch already have a lot of their people in Indonesia, and they think like, okay, let's just establish a colonies in here. And then the Dutch also, I think, because the market is it's become like homogenized, like there are a lot of competition from around the world. People like maybe the Spanish or the Portuguese also selling nutmeg, selling cardamom, and selling all these spices. In Europe at that time, they grow a taste of sugar, so they start liking something sweet. So the Dutch government right now that has replaced the VOC, they decided that Indonesia should produce a lot of sugar. And this is when the Dutch start doing forced plantation, because they want to make a lot of profit. So you choose Java Island as the place where they grow sugar. And this is very interesting. So Java in Indonesia is one of the most populated island in the world. I think almost around more than 60% of Indonesian people actually living in Java. So the reason is because of this sugar plantation. So what happened is that it's kind of hard for the Dutch to, let's say, make Indonesia as their slave, because if someone is trying to, make them a slave, like maybe they can run away, like the terrain is a bit different, etc. So there's like a really common story that is, I read it long time ago, but I can't find their source. But this is like a very common story. What happened is that the Dutch have this idea that they can borrow against themselves, against their future self. And they use this borrowed money and create like some kind of a marketing campaign to the Indonesian women. So they say that if you have a baby, we will give you money. So of course, like people say like, oh wow, free money, yay, let's have more babies. So a lot of Indonesian people, like, they make more babies, and then they got money from the Dutch. And then there's a sudden spike on the population, right? And by the time all of these kids, all of these babies come into age, the only jobs that is available are in the sugar plantation. So then they can, they can get like cheap labor, and then grow the sugar plantation. And then there is a saying in Indonesia called "banyak anak banyak rezeki," which means with many kids come many fortune. And this saying is still exists up until now, and it's actually originated from this marketing strategy from the Dutch.
Wow. So because it was too dangerous or risky or expensive to just perpetrate outright slavery, they did this kind of economic workaround where they just incentivize people to have a lot of kids and then basically leave them with only one option for employment, which are the sugar plantations. Wow.
Yeah. And then that's make Indonesia, especially Java, the most populated island, because back in the day, people have like 12 kids, 10 kids. Even my mom has like, my mom grew up in the 1940s, and then she has like 8 siblings. So
wow. And so that's still part of the culture today. It's still a saying in the culture.
It's declined now. Because like later on, they try to manage the population, and then right now, like most of people have like 2 kids on average. But yeah, there was a big time where that actually happened.
Wow, what a story.
I know, it's quite fascinating actually.
Yeah, it is.
So because of this strategy, actually the Dutch make a bank on the sugar plantation, right? And also during this time, they created their first central banks in Indonesia. So it's called the Javash Bank. And in the beginning, the central bank was created to fund this forced plantation. So you also like to talk about, property rights and violation of property rights, right? And this is also very interesting between the period of VOC and the Dutch. So many people probably asking like, how come VOC were able to conquer Indonesia and also the Dutch, and then enable this forced plantation? It's because the land ownership in Indonesia was a blur subject. So anyone can claim the ownership of the land. So the king can claim the ownership of the land. The farmer who cultivate the land can claim the ownership of the land. Or if you have a house situated on that land, you can also claim ownership. So the POC has this idea that if they can get the rights of harvest, they don't claim the ownership of the land, but they just get the right of harvest, and they manage to make a negotiation and agreement with like the noble people and the landlord, and after not long after that, everyone needs to pay with their harvest, and then this forced plantation become a massive thing, and slowly they take the ownership of the land because they get this right of harvest. And back in the day as well, like they implement tax, but it's not like a tax that you have to pay with money, but you have to pay it with your produce, like you have bunch of rice, you have to give it to the VOC, you give it to the Dutch, you have bunch of clove, give it to us. So that's I think like the first violation of property rights, because like you own your, like these people own the land, but because they it's like a verbal agreement. There's nothing like can how do I say, like can create that force so that people will understand that this is belong to them, like the property rights is belong to them.
Right. So let me ask you this then. The original incentive program where the Dutch were paying Indonesian families to have more kids, where was it? Was that currency? Was that a fiat currency being issued and paid to them?
No, I think it is just still like a silverback currency.
Silverbacked originally, okay. And then they later move. So after they basically realize there's a labor shortage, right? We need to incentivize population growth. They incentivize population growth. And then they, instead of having a dispute about land ownership, they just buy the rights to the economic output of the land, the harvest effectively. And then that's used as, I guess, the attack surface to ultimately just claim the land, right?
Yeah.
They just profit from the land and then use the profits to, I guess, ultimately take ownership of the land.
Yeah. Because like what is the good of land? Like you have the purpose of land is the economic output, like the produce, right?
Right.
And I think back in the day, maybe the landowner doesn't really think about it. They just see it, this is my land, but like they don't they don't think it that far.
Well, it's interesting just how there's two sort of acts of deception here with the, free, quote unquote, free money to have more kids, but they're kind of, I guess, gaming people in the short term, but in their long-term best interest. And they did the same thing with the land acquisition. And it just points to this whole idea, this big general theme, which we talk about a lot on the show. It's like money is being the prime mover of human action or something like that. It's like, if you can control the money or use money in a certain way, you can really sculpt history, right? I mean, they really rewrote history to colonialize, I guess, Indonesia.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, money is a tool, and if you know how to use the tool, like if you can go far. You can create beautiful things. You can create dangerous things, I guess.
Yeah.
So yeah. So yeah, and but because this is also starting based on the framework from Ray Dalio, Indonesia, the Dutch actually currently right now on the declining phase. So after the VOC went bankrupt, and even though they make profit from the sugar industry, they cannot compete with the British. And then there's still like this Anglo-Dutch war, the fourth Anglo-Dutch war happened, and then the Dutch lost on that war. And then there's also European depression. So because there are a lot of colonial forces that they sell the same kind of commodities in Europe. So what happened is that there's like a spice bubble in Europe. There's a period called the Long Depression where the spice bubble burst. and then no one wants to buy. There's a lot of stockpile of these spices um, in the warehouse and etc. So in the end, the Dutch power declined, and then the British become the second world order, the world reserve currency.
So followed that arc almost to a T.
Almost to a T, yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
And I mean, for the second world order, Indonesia probably not. What is it called? They're not closely related to the British because they're still under the Dutch Empire. But what happened is that this is also a very interesting turnaround, because after Dutch lose their power, lose their world reserve status, they become mellowed out, if you can say. Like they think like, oh wow, we owe so much to the Indonesian, to the places that they colonialized. So there is a growth of ethnic politics, and the Dutch thinking that Indonesian people deserve the rights of education, they deserve the rights of irrigation, clean water. Like, this is where their philanthropy start flourish. And it's actually a good time for Indonesia, because then a lot of scholars start to emerge. There are university being built in Indonesia. People can suddenly learn to read. They go to abroad. They got like different perspective of the world. And at that time, the Dutch also were thinking about maybe we should give Indonesia independence. So they are actually preparing Indonesia for independence, right? And Indonesia, and this is also very interesting. So Indonesia is, like I said, it's like consists of 17,000 islands. There are almost like more than 700 language being spoken in Indonesia from this different island. And instead of choosing like one language from, let's say, Java, because it's the most populous island, like choosing that as the national language, they did the opposite. They say like, we have to create our own new language. So Bahasa Indonesia was first built in 1928. It's actually a mix of different language. There's a local language, there's Arab, there's Portuguese, there's a little bit Chinese, there's a little bit English. So it's like a melting pot of language. And this language is still being developed up until now. Like every day there will be new words in the dictionary, if I can say. So it's a quite interesting approach, rather than choose one language. Let's just make our own new language.
Wow.
Yeah.
700 different languages. So are those dialects, or are they all distinctly different languages?
Distinctly different language.
Wow.
Indonesia is one of the places where most people can speak at least 3 languages.
Wow, I would imagine so. 700 spoken.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So, yeah, it's very interesting. And the Dutch basically wants to give Indonesia independence. But if we see what happened in the world at that time, as British become the leading empire, we have Industrial Revolution, and then the First World War broke out, and then the Second World War broke out, right? And this is when it's really affect Indonesia, because the Dutch already kind of losing their power, and also the Japanese at that time become one of the competing power in the area. And the Japanese came to Indonesia to basically, they say that they are the savior, because they portray themselves as the big brother for Indonesia, because we are Asia. We are Asia, right? Like, this, Caucasian foreign people, it's completely different. We are Asia, so you are our ally. So the Japanese come to Indonesia and then basically kick out the Dutch, and it was quite a rough time, because a lot of companies start being established in Indonesia made by the Dutch. So and in the sudden, when Japan come, a lot of people just without any job. Like, for instance, like my grandpa, he worked at the oil company, like the Dutch oil company, and when the Japanese come, all the Dutch fled the country. So he was like by himself in Sumatra, where he's actually originally from Java. So this is like, I don't know, the distance between Ireland to let's say Germany, I guess. So it's quite far. So he have to walk and sail for 6 months to come back to his hometown just because of this.
Wow.
But yeah, it's a crazy time. And the Japanese basically they settled in Indonesia, and then instead of, they try to get like the sympathy from Indonesian people, saying that they are the big brothers, or like the big brothers, and also they dismantled the central bank. So they created their own central bank, and then the Dutch printed their own money, and then they say that instead of using the guilder, which is not a common money that being used in Indonesia, the Dutch guilder, they created the Japanese version that they call it Rupiah. Rupiah means silver in Bahasa Indonesia, or in Sanskrit at that time. And this is the way to getting the sympathy of Indonesia. Like, look, you don't use the Dutch money anymore. This is your money. This is called Rupiah, and you can use this. And everyone was, in the beginning, they were like quite excited, because they think like, wow, okay, these people are good. They come to help us out, without without they know that actually it's a different thing. So the Japan was like, okay, you guys need to join us to fight the Western, and they start recruiting people for to be their army, and then they enact their own slave labor.
Wow.
So like it's even worse than the Dutch. Yeah, so it's called Romusha. Basically another violation that happened during the Japanese occupation. So all of this, within 3 centuries, when the Dutch came to Indonesia and then start establishing this whole industries of plantation, the Japan decided that we change all of this. We change the sugar plantation. We have to plan anything that related to war. So like rubber. So they change the already existing plantation into a completely different plantation, right? And then they also burn a lot of like factories, like sugar factories. And so the commodities that was quite useful at that time was rubber, and also what we call jarak or jatropha plant, which is a plant that created biodiesel. So this is the only thing that they force people to plant. And I mean, it doesn't really matter like whether you actually the landowner or you are the coolies, like everyone have to work for the Japan. And it was actually quite brutal, more brutal than the Dutch era.
Wow. So the Japanese were doing forced conversions on these sugar plantations into rubber and or biodiesel. And then they were forcibly putting labor on these plantations. Is this like just putting a gun to your head saying get to work kind of slave labor?
Kind of, yeah. Like it's like nothing. If you there are two two type of jobs for Indonesian. Either you are become the soldier or you work in the plantation.
Wow.
Nothing else. So
and this was like all to fund the war effort during World War II.
Yeah. Yes.
Wow.
This is to fund that time. And but like as we know, the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bomb kind of ended the Japanese occupation, right? And when this happened, the Japanese also fled the country, fled Indonesia. And Indonesian people see this as a vacuum of power. Like, wow, for the first time, there's no occupant in here. The Dutch are gone, the Japanese are gone. So they decided to proclaim their own independence. So we proclaim our independence on 1945. And I think because we see it like no one is here, and quickly got recognition from like neighboring countries like Egypt and India, etc. So when this happened, the Dutch getting upset because after the Allies won the war, the Dutch wants to come back to Indonesia and say like, look, you guys still belong to us. Like you do not tell that you got independence, okay? So they try to come back, and this is called the military aggression. So it's not only just like the Dutch as the main force, but it's also there are like Americans, there are British. They want to take this whole area back because they think like there's a lot of influence from fascism and etc. Right? But Indonesia wants to fight back because like we think that we already got our own independence. We are an independent country. We don't want to be colonialized anymore. So the way, a part of like getting into like a real conflict, like a war conflict, another way for the Allies at that time or the Dutch to destabilize Indonesia is through a currency war. So Indonesia, in 1946, they decided like, if we are an independent country, we need to have our own money. We cannot use the Dutch gulden anymore. So the vice presidents they announced that we are going to create like our own version of rupiah, but it's actually a greenback money. So it's not backed by, it's not linked to any precious metal. It's not linked to any gold or silver. It's just a greenback. And then they create a fixed rate of 2 rupiah equals a gram of gold, right? So this is called ori. So when the Dutch came, they see that Indonesia have their own money. There's also the Japanese version of Japanese rupiah. So then they decided that they put more of their own money, the Dutch guilder, and then they create fake money. They create fake ori, they create fake rupiah, and just try to destabilize this rupiah market. Yeah.
Right. This is just a great point that, inflation, like we think arbitrary supply expansion of fiat currency, we've been conditioned to think that's good and healthy and the central bank does it for our own benefit. But here you are laying out the case that it was used as a weapon in wartime, right? They're trying to economically destabilize an area by counterfeiting its currency effectively.
Yeah. And it's also quite funny because like the rupiah is greenback, obviously lose value quickly in comparison to the Dutch guilder. So the people are kind of stuck in the middle in here. So if you, let's say, if I'm a merchant, I would probably prefer to get the Dutch guilder because it's more stable. It's, it's actually it has a stable value. But if a nationalist sees me accepting Dutch guilder, then they see me as a traitor. So there's a lot of there's a war between the nationalists, like Indonesian nationalists, and then also the Dutch. And then if they accept the rupiah, it loses value because within 1 year, so they say that 2 rupiah equals 1 gram of gold. And within 1 year, 1 gram of gold is equal 500 rupiah. So that's already lose so much value.
Wow.
So this is why back in the day, if we ask any grandma or grandpa in Indonesia, they always say, save your money in gold, because that's the only the only thing that that you can rely on.
Right.
Yeah.
Grandma wisdom. They know best.
Grandma's wisdom. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, and I mean, this whole aggressions keep happening, and not only just Indonesia needs to deal with the aggression from the allies, but they're also dealing with their own internal conflict. Right? There's a lot of communist influence start happening in Indonesia. So there's kind of civil war happening. There's also war with the allies. So actually there was an incident that happened between the Indonesian government and the communists, and then they're able to resolve it quite quickly. And the US actually, as the third world order, right? Because this is after the World War II, the British Empire declined. The empire is getting too expensive, and US, especially after Bretton Woods system, they decided this is the new reserve currency that makes the US become the third empire, third world order. And one of the way for the US start spreading their power is through Marshall Plan, try to stop the spreading of communism. And they see that Indonesia were able to resolve the problem with communism. So then the US forced the Dutch to you guys need to stop this military aggression. Just give Indonesia just recognize the Indonesia as independent. So in 1949, the Dutch and Indonesia come together in Den Haag, and they created this round table agreement. The Dutch recognize Indonesia independence, but there's a but. Indonesia needs to pay the Dutch war debt, which is equal to 4.9 billion guilder at that time, 5.2 or something like that, between 4
so
to
you can have your independence at a price.
At a price, exactly. Yeah. It's I think for Indonesia, this is as good as they can get, I guess. And they say okay, they signed the agreement, and then the Dutch also said the Javanese bank, which is the central bank that they created, should be the Indonesia central bank. So this is kind of funny, because Indonesia tried to create their own central bank by printing the ori, right? Their own money, but they cannot compete with the Javanese bank. So then, okay, the central bank has been established in Indonesia, and Indonesia needs to pay the war debt. And this is actually really hard for Indonesia after they got their recognition. And there's so many radicals policy need to be made just to pay this war debt. So one of the radical policies was this thing called Shafruddin's scissor. So as we know that there are a lot of guilder, a lot of Dutch money being circulated in Indonesia, and they need to basically reduce the circulation.
Mm-hmm.
So what happened? The minister Shafruddin at that time has this idea that everyone should cut the guilder, into half physically. They have to cut the guilder into half.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, if you have like a 5 florin guilder, and you cut into half, so then this money, the 5 guilder, become 2.5. The right side, you can use it to purchase. The left side, use for bond with the maturity of 40 years, something like that.
Mm-hmm. So loan it to the government, basically.
Yeah. Loan it to government.
Loan the government half the money supply.
Half the money supply, exactly.
Wow.
And they managed to kind of reduce the circulation, right? But yeah, it doesn't take long that Indonesian money just like devalued, so much. And another thing that they did was they like the inflation actually going rampant because of this, because it's a greenback money, and the first government also have to deal with this war debt. So of course, the only thing that they can do is to print money, because the whole trading infrastructure was made by the Dutch, and Indonesia needs to restart everything from the bottom up, right? So within 1 year, the money has lost its value by 160%. And another radical economic policy that they did after this, starting there's inflation happening, they tried to cut the zero. So they did the debasement. So if you have like 100 rupiah, the 100 rupiah now worth 10 rupiah. Like they cut the zero. So like if you have 100 rupiah bill, it's not worth it anymore. And if you have basically they cut it by like 90%. So what happened is that, of course, people who own this money, like 100 rupiah will not be useful anymore. So they go to market, they buy a lot of stuff, and obviously drive the price up, because suddenly like there's this flood of money, and people in the market think that they're getting rich, but actually no, this money is not useful.
Right.
And then the government also froze any bank account that has balance more than 25,000 rupiah. So like, and it's a bit crazy. So they debased the currency. Obviously, like inflation happened, and because of this war debt burden, there's like there's a sentiment of anti-Western, right? Like there are more, like there are a lot of maybe grudges against like the debt. So there's a gain. There are more influence of communism happening in Indonesia. And then the first president also trying to, let's say, create a good branding, I guess, for Indonesia. So they invest in expensive big budget events such as like ASEAN Games. There's like a non-aligned movement conference, and then he built like a lot of statues like to show like patriotism, etc. And another thing is that Malaysia, which is the neighboring countries, will get the independence from the British, and Indonesia see this as like an attack for Indonesia, because they think like Malaysia will be Malaysia, they consider it as a brother, but then if you what is it called, like if they got independence from the British, means they are like the British ally for some reason.
Wow.
So they wage war against Malaysia, and then this is creating even more spending, right? The spending even more bloated, the budgets become more deficit, and like it's just getting worse. And because of these policies, the inflation soar. So what happened is that in 1966, the inflation rose to 500%.
Wow.
And then in the black market, it's even more than that, like maybe even 5,000% on the black market. So for like, let's say if you want to trade US dollars with Rupiah.
So 500% probably under the price controls and whatnot that were put in place, but 5,000% in the real market.
In the real market, yeah.
Wow.
And then they did as well. So yeah, they already debased the value. They debased the Indonesian value before, and then they did the debasement again. So anything that let's say money that is between 500 to 1,000, they cut the value into, now it's more than 10%. Just to trying to make it looks like it's everything is all right.
Yeah, it's an illusion, right? It's just
an illusion.
You're doing I guess an inverse. You're trying to dilute the perception of inflation ultimately, right? This, like, all of a sudden I needed, I don't know, 100 rupiah to buy this bread a couple of years ago. Now it's 10,000. Well, they just chop off a few zeros and act like everything's back to normal. And I assume this was done just overnight, right? They just kind of issue an edict and say, hey, that 1,000 is now 100, basically.
Yeah.
This is a good reminder here that, again, in the Western world, where we take these things for granted, like the $100 bill is just a $100 bill. I can always spend it. It always works. It's, roughly the same value over time. But government holds a kill switch on all money, all fiat currency. They can turn it off at any time. They can change its denomination. They can do anything. We saw this in India too, where overnight the 500 rupee banknote was just deauthorized. Right. So like one day
500 and 1,000.
And 1,000. Thank you. It's just that, there's a liability inherent to fiat currency that you cannot get rid of. Like, people think they're holding money. It's just an asset they can use to spend, but there's a liability attached to it that few people understand.
Exactly. Yeah. I actually bought this 1 rupiah note as a reminder, because back in the day, this is half of gram of gold, right? And then right now, half gram of gold in Indonesia is worth 400,000 rupiah.
Wow. Staggering.
I know, it's crazy. So
what is the period of time then that it went from 1 to 400,000?
Let's say 46 to right now, 2021.
So 1946 to 2021. So a period of 75 years, I guess.
75 years. I
Wow.
mean, it's not a good investment, I guess.
No, not a good investment.
A good investment. Yeah. So, so hyperinflation happened. And this is during, let's say, when my dad was 16 years old. And he told me that it was really bad. Like, everything has become so expensive. Everyone is starving. He have to eat snail from the river and then like just go to, like, I don't know, some bushes and then try to figure out what are the things that they can eat. A
Wow.
lot of business went bankrupt. My grandpa's business went bankrupt. But like, for example, on my mom's story, like her father is a civil servant. So the civil servants were still quite okay because they got supported by the government. Their salary got increased and then they got like benefit, so this is why
Right.
in my parents' generation, everyone always say you have to work as a civil servant because your life is going to be guaranteed, which is kind of funny. Yeah. So I think this is the reason why, I mean, this is also the sentiment of a more authoritarian government. Oh, by the way, before this whole hyperinflation happening, I forgot to mention the important factor was that the first president, he decided that he wants to be the president of a lifetime, and and then he created this type of democracy called the guided democracy, and then the guided economy. So all the economy activity need to have an approval from the president. Yeah, from the government. So this whole thing basically created this hyperinflation, right? The government deny on free market actually make things worse.
It's so perverted because, as you mentioned earlier, Indonesia is so rich in natural resources. I mean, there's like, food's abundant relatively. There's fruit growing on trees, and it's such a beautiful place, has a great climate. But in these instances of broken money, it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't even matter that you're naturally rich. The trust and cooperation between people is basically annihilated, right? When the money doesn't work, you just can't coordinate anything. You can't engage in capitalism, basically. So all the wealth associated with capitalism declines. And then the state becomes the only institution that grows. And the state, by virtue of monopolizing the money, but the problem with that is government's misallocating all of that capital because they don't earn the money, they steal the money. So when the money's stolen, it's very easy to spend, right? They want a pay raise, give them a pay raise.
Yeah.
And so you end up, this is like, we saw this in Soviet Russia too, where by the end, right before the collapse of the USSR, I think 1/3 of employees in the entire country worked for the state. They were informants typically. And everyone's life is miserable. Like the job is a nonsense job. You just show up and sit behind a desk or push paper. You're not creating any actual economic value. You're just consuming economic value. So this idea of breaking the money actually pushes us away from production, like productive activity, and towards consumption. I mean, that seems to be the theme that keeps happening in all these societies that leads to their demise.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, this because of this hyperinflation, this is the end of the 20 years of ruling for the first president, Sukarno. And it's also quite a bloody transition because he grew into more and more he adopting more and more communism value. So there was an incident in the 30th of September where 7th of General got kidnapped supposedly by the Communist Party, and then they got assassinated in there, and obviously there's a like pushback from the Indonesian people, and there's like a bloody massacre happening with the Communist Party, and it's something that Indonesian people probably doesn't want to talk about. But yeah, like everyone, if want to learn about that, they can, I think, learn it on the internet, like what's happening between 1966 and 1965, 1966. In that sense. So during this transition, then this another guy came into power, but he actually has a different approach than the first president. So he is, I think, more getting a lot of influence from the US. When he start getting into power, actually it's quite good. Like he reduced the inflation from 600% to 16%, which is quite improvement by increasing interest rate and getting also foreign loan. Like this is where the IMF and the World Bank start coming to Indonesia. So in what happened during the first president time, like he closed most of the international investment because he has this anti-Western sentiment, right? Like he thinks that it's just another new type of colonialism, where the other guy, he decided to open the Indonesia for foreign investment. But it's also a bit debatable. Like some part is actually really help Indonesia from the famine, from the hunger, and increase the economy output. But on the other side, a lot of foreign investment came to Indonesia and take important resources such as gold. Like there's several like foreign companies that has a gold mining in Indonesia. Like one of them is like Freeport, the US company. So yeah, it's quite controversial, if we can say. But I guess after what happened previously, 20 years earlier, I think Indonesian people are quite happy with the development that's been happening, even though the guy is also running as a dictator, right? Like he ran for 32 years in Indonesia, the second president. And because he ran so long and he's coming from military background, he basically he managed to get surrounded by a lot of rent seeker, a lot of kleptocracy, like corruption. There's a lot of corruption. A lot of military people own important, let's say, industry in Indonesia, and then they enrich themselves, kind of like that. So obviously the wealth gap is getting even bigger as well. And at that time there's no free speech. You can't criticize the government. If you criticize, it's you're not gonna have a happy ending, basically. If you criticize the government.
When was this stance against criticism?
When?
Yeah, what year is this? Is this ongoing today, or?
A little bit, kind of, but it's better than before. Like this is between 1966 until 1998. This is where during his period, and a lot of people, if you spoke against the government, they going to kidnap you, and you don't hear from them, for a long time. Right now, you still you have some sort of free speech, but also quite limited, if I can say, in Indonesia.
Yeah, I recall before we left Indonesia, I think it was a tourist, had spoken out against the government and was detained for just saying something. I don't know the exact circumstances, but I think they made a post or a video of some kind speaking out against Indonesia or some representative of Indonesia, and they were detained for that, which in the Western world is like unheard of. I mean, not unheard of, but it goes against at least the principles of Western civilization. Not to say that it's not also done here, but it was pretty shocking for us to hear that when we were there.
Yeah, I guess there's like certain, I mean, when it comes to free speech, as long as the government control the money, I guess there's no such thing as free speech.
That's exactly right. Yep. That's right.
But So back to the guy. I have 19. Yeah, but this is actually quite a booming time for Indonesia, and especially Indonesia produced a lot of oil, and there was the Iraq, the Gulf War happening in the US, and Indonesia was part of the OPEC and obviously profit from this war somehow. So this is actually quite a booming time for Indonesia, and everyone thinks like this is a great time. People are getting rich, and the government also established a fixed rate between Rupiah and US dollars, which mean that they set a certain price, and if the price goes up or below, the government is going to compensate that, right? And with this cheap dollar, a lot of companies actually borrowed money in a dollar denomination in Indonesia. So yeah, back in 1990s, this is the time where there are massive what is it called, like banking become there's a banking fever, like there's a new banks established in Indonesia, and obviously with new banks there are more loans, more debt, right? So a lot of companies actually borrowed cheap dollar. And in 19 if I'm not mistaken, 1985, and between 1985 and 1995, there's another problem happening in between Japan and Germany and the US. So Japan's economy is declining. So Japan, Germany, and US decided to come together and created a Plaza Accord and also reverse Plaza Accord, which essentially is to devalue dollars. So then these other countries can become more competitive. But what happened when dollars got devalued, it's like some kind of a contagion effect to other countries who already enjoy this, cheap dollars everywhere. So it started in Thailand, and, Thailand suddenly, like, the dollar value is just too much for the Thai baht. And the value of Thai baht, if I'm not mistaken, is just going down to like almost lose like 20%. And then the Thai government tried to spend more than $20 billion to maintain the baht rate with the dollar, but ultimately failed. And this is kind of like a cascading effect between all of the countries in Asia, right? And this is where in 1997, this is where it called the Asia crisis. And this is happening even worse in Indonesia. So before, $1 was being pegged, have a fixed rate of $2,600. 2,600 rupiah. So $1 is equal to 2,600 rupiah. And by May, it became 16,000 rupiah. So it grew.
Wow.
Almost, what was that, like 8 times, 800%.
Wow.
Yeah.
And this is all, I mean, again, all of these machinations where they're trying to peg one currency to a fixed rate of another. This is all government intervention trying to fight market forces. Like, people are always just going to trade around whatever barriers they put in their way. The market always wins, I guess, is the short punchline. But we have so many instances of governments trying to intervene and intercede and interrupt market forces. And it never works. It never works, yet governments keep trying to do it.
Yeah, I mean, it's an illusion, right? Like, it's an illusion that you can control this thing. But like, market is a very organic, it's almost like an organism. And then one of the best quote from Jurassic Park, life will find its way.
That's right. Life finds a way. Exactly.
So does market, I guess. Market will find its way.
That's right.
So I mean, Rupiah is just like tank, like Rupiah devalued a lot, GDP plummeted, like everyone's become panic, and suddenly the government decided like we are no longer you know having a fixed rate against dollars. We have a floating rate, and then everyone's become panicked because they borrowed money in dollar terms, right? So,
Right.
and yeah, they there's a run on banks. So it's a chaos time. It's a chaos time, and obviously, like I mentioned before, in 1980s and early 1990s, there are a lot of banks being created in Indonesia. There's a bank fever, and this bank, actually, there are a lot of like sick banks, that the one that not productive anymore. So this has become liabilities for Indonesian government, and the IMF also through with Bank Indonesia decided that they will bail the banks out. This is like 2008, right? This is actually history kind of rhyme, like repeat itself. So yeah, the deadline to repay this fund, like this what is it called? We call it the BLBI. So like the fund that from IMF and Bank Indonesia, the bailout fund. So the government froze 38 unhealthy banks, and then they save 48 banks, and these 48 banks receive the BLBI fund from IMF. But one of the, let's say, terms and agreement from the IMF, the IMF wants Indonesia to increase the interest rate, but the problem is the economy is already contract so much that is, if you try to increase the interest rate, it's just gonna create chaos, right? So that's also what happened in on May 5th. People there start a lot of like protests happening in Indonesia, and then the government decided to cut subsidies on kerosene, electricity, and all of these basic commodities that is being supported by the government. And obviously everyone went into hysteria and panic, and the price of gasoline rose by 70%. And yeah, like there's like riots everywhere. And when there is this type of instability, people are trying to find like a black sheep, like who are the people that they're going to blame. And then they blame it to the Chinese, like Indonesian Chinese. There are a lot of what is it called, like violence against them, and they become main target. It was crazy. 1998 was crazy. So in the end, the people took over the parliament building, and then they forced the second president to resign. So then he resigned after 32 years.
Wow.
That's like, that's like kind of like the, if I can see, I mean, the art also can be implemented in the nation scale, right? So this is like when the bubbles starting to burst and people are become panicked.
Yeah, that same arc that governs the New World Order, you can see a microcosm of it inside of countries. And it's similarly connected to the debasement of the currency, right? Like there's a buildup, there's healthy debt, right? As there's economic growth being taken place, but then it reaches a point where the debt can no longer service the growth of the economy and it goes into contraction. But all the while, government intervention's worsening, trying to correct the problems, but actually making the problems worse, which is so, I mean, it's interesting to look at it that way, but it's also like, what are we doing? We just keep repeating. We've repeated it so many times that Ray Dalio is writing a book about it, drawing little pictures about how it happens.
Yeah, I know. I don't know. I guess it's just like, what's that? There's like a tweet that is being circulated on Twitter, like hard man, hard time create hard man. Hard man makes good time create weak man.
Yes, exactly. It's all cyclical, but just looking at it through the Bitcoin lens, I mean, if Bitcoin were available, I think this arc would look a lot different, right? It would clear itself much more quickly because people would have more options, frankly.
Yeah, I mean, there's no money, there's no, let's say, things that manipulate the market. And I don't know, it's just like, I don't know. I see the market is like a kid, you know, like you cannot lie to the kid. Like if you lie to the kid's gonna become spoiled, kind of like that.
Yeah,
like you have to. Yeah, I don't know. It's just it's trying to control something that alive. It's almost impossible.
Yeah, I've said you can't push water. You know, it's like you're trying to force something that's organic and it just flows around you. So you try to apply force to water. If you push water, what does it do? It just goes around your hands, you know? And it's also interesting too, that, you know, we're zeroed in right now on Indonesia, but in these times where the US dollar was kind of the premier asset, right? Where people had borrowed dollars, but then when there was a subsequent decoupling, like I know when I was there, the dollar is very valued, right? Still. It's very valued in Indonesia and in many places in the world. But when you come to realize that like the rupiah has the same mechanics as the dollar, it's like the asset that you think you're getting out of a bad asset, rupiah, and getting into dollars, now I'm safe. Like, no, not at all. You've left one pyramid scheme and moved into another pyramid scheme. I mean, maybe it's a bigger pyramid scheme and it's more stable and it's more widely accepted, but it's still another scheme. So, we've been stuck in this pattern, it seems like, across human history of just like trying to get out of one bad money into another bad money. But like grandma's wisdom said, gold was the one you really wanted, right?
Yeah.
But gold was just hard to use day to day.
Yeah. And the gold's also debatable, right? With whether, and I think that the biggest issue here is the supply itself, right? Like, if people have the ability to print money or become more productive, they will opt to print more money because, you know, being productive is a hard work,
right?
Using energy, you know, it's tiring. It's tiring to be productive. But the only way for anyone or even country, a person or country needs to survive is they need to earn more than they spend, right? And then they have they can save what they're earning in something that is, you know, valuable.
Yeah, it's the path of least resistance. If you can just print money to get out of your past bad decisions, then you'll do that. But if that option's not there, then you'll go to work, right? And then, to your point, producing more than you consume. Like, it's so basic and obvious. You know that if you're if you're just a solo farmer in the middle of nowhere, if you want to survive long term, you better produce more than you consume, obviously. Well, it turns out the same is true for every level of economic analysis, right? The individual, the company, the nation. Yet we keep trying to consume more than we produce via this fiat money mechanism, right? We've tried to find an excuse to just consume and not produce, have others produce for us. But it just creates this battlefield of economic activity that, I mean, it's really been the number one driver in human history, right? Just people fighting over who's producing and who's consuming.
Definitely. And I hope that people will see that. I hope people will wake up and then, like, you know, hey, go to work.
Yeah, exactly.
So I guess the Asia crisis kind of like become the end of the second president, even though he actually made quite a lot of progress on the Indonesia economy. But yeah, it's just like too many corruption happening, and even then the fund that was being disbursed by the Bank Indonesia and also what is it called, the IMF, like there are a lot of scandals going on in here, like 54 trillion went missing for somehow because of this corruption, right? And this is also the thing, like, you trying to help people, but if with free money is actually there are a lot of, let's say, temptation to do bad things, right?
Mhm.
So up until now, there are this money is still being disputed. A lot of banks still not repaid back their loans from the Bank Indonesia. Some of the top banks got detained for corruption or fled the countries. So yeah, still like problems right now. And so looking back again to the arc, as we see that the Asia crisis is like maybe at just like after the top peak and then start to going decline. I mean, right now Indonesia is facing the period of again, like a lot of printing money and then debt. And like any of this arc, they're always a competing, let's say, competing actor. Where like in Dutch there's British, and then in British time there's US, and then now when US become the world reserve currency, there's Chinese, right? So China has gained a lot of like relationship with the Indonesian government. And obviously like Indonesia just received like quite a bunch of money for the Belt and Road Initiative, in Indonesia. So the question is whether are we currently like right now on the declining phase, and where is the next order, right? Where's the new order? Are we going to go to another fiat system? Are we going to like a China system, like CBDC, like this type of economy? Or we go to like a completely new system, which is Bitcoin, right? So I guess this is the question for not only Indonesian, but also for everyone around the world.
You were just saying that, yeah. So like the next world order, is it another fiat currency standard, or do we move to something incorruptible like Bitcoin? And it's an open question, but I just wanted to add to that it's also a choice ultimately. Like us educating people about this history and about the nature of monetary corruption and how it enables all forms of government tyranny and atrocity, I think that's key to enabling the right choice, right? Because ultimately it is just a decision. If people decide to hold their savings in Bitcoin and facilitate exchange in Bitcoin, then all of this dark history goes away, right? It's no longer part of our future.
Exactly. And it's just like the same thing like what happened with gold standard, right? Like there's no like authority saying that we are using gold. Like it
Exactly.
is market who decided that they think this rock has a value. This rock can store value for a long time, and they decided that they want to use it. And then nations start adopting it, and then everyone in the world start adopting it. So it's true, like it depends on us. It depends on the market as well, like what kind of a world that we want to see. And it's a good framework what Ray Dalio put up because this framework is actually a framework of a fiat system, right? And it's just there's a ascend, there's peak and decline, and it's just going to continue like that. So the question is, if we adopt another fiat system, are we like, are we going to stay for another decline or another crazy time, or do we want to dive into the unknown and then see, create something new, create a new framework?
Yeah.
That's yeah.
Yeah, it's very exciting. And it seems like the race is on in the digital space, right? Because now we have states trying to position themselves like China, actually, to have this total this technocracy. They control everything. They've got a central bank digital currency. Everything's run by a master app. There's that whole, kind of Orwellian dystopian digital possibility. And then there's this other side, which is Bitcoin, right? It's like self-sovereignty. Everyone owns themselves. There's less information asymmetry, just fair, stable rules for people to play by. So it's very interesting to be alive right now, because it seems like the possibilities are just very open, right? Could go very dark or could go very light.
And I mean, like, another thing that Ray Dalio pointed out is that every new order always comes with a new type of technology, right? And US has birthed internet, like the US world order has birthed internet. And I see that Bitcoin is like some kind of a new technology that will be adopted, like, because internet has become so connected. It needs value of, that we can use within that internet space, and the only thing that makes sense is Bitcoin rather than the other type of centralized monetary or coin tokens.
Yeah, I mean, the history we've walked through so far, like, how much of it would not have transpired if there was just this fixed rule set in money, right? Where no one could manipulate it, or, oh, we're going to peg our currency at 2-to-1 to this. Like, all these games that people are trying to play, they just get vaporized if you're on a Bitcoin standard. So it's interesting to think about how much it could really change things.
Yeah. And then countries like Indonesia, for example, like, I think 60% of them are unbanked. We have 270 million people in Indonesia, the fourth largest population in the world, just after US. And a lot of them doesn't have bank, right? And then if we see from the statistic as well, banks, the creation of new banks are actually declining every year in Indonesia. Like, there are less and less bank being created in Indonesia, and there are more fintech, right? People are actually moving towards mobile penetration is like 70% right now, 60-70% in Indonesia. Most people own mobile phone. So it's actually, there's a lot of potential for Indonesia to adopt Bitcoin, but it is a matter of education. It is a matter of for us to understand our current system, which is like, if after you read history and if you see what's happening, you will start thinking, like, why do I hold fiat money?
Right.
So it is what, like, the kind of show that you made, the What is Money show, like the question of money. This is the kind of education that everyone needs to have, only just, like, American, but everyone in the world, including Indonesia, needs to know this question: what is money?
Yeah, and I would throw in here that even Ray Dalio, right, a guy that's like the most successful hedge fund manager in history, understands history at a very deep level, as is plain to see in his writing, his books, and his talking, understands the value of gold. Even only recently did he start to understand the value of Bitcoin. Like, it took this guy that presumably in the world is one of the most knowledgeable people on markets, money, history, all these things. He only just now started to see it. So, like, this isn't some educational campaign that like a few people have this education and a lot of people don't. It's like 99.99% of humans have no idea what money is, in my estimation. If Ray Dalio doesn't know what money is, I'm going to say that disqualifies like 99.99% of everyone else. So this is it's like as a species, we have discounted how important money is. And we've tried to manage it and play these games and create fiat and, all these games we talked about, all this economic colonialism and slavery and all, like we keep trying to game the system, but it just blows up in our face every single time.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think there are like certain reason why they want people to put people in the dark, so then they can keep the money game continue. This whole things continue. But we are living in the new era. We are living in the information era, and we have, let's say, a benefit more than our predecessor, because right now I can converse with you about money in Indonesia just through internet, right?
Yes.
Like this is something I haven't been like there's nothing happened like this before. So
exactly.
Yeah. And talking as a close thing to pointed out, but Indonesia, when it comes to like crypto adoption, Indonesia is, crypto adoption is still very small, like 270 million people, and only 7.4 million were currently using cryptocurrency. Most of them own a little bit of Bitcoin, but the question is that, do they really understand Bitcoin? Do they just like hold Bitcoin in terms of getting more fiat, or they own Bitcoin because they want to hodl Bitcoin, right? So this is another question. And I mean, Indonesia, there's with everything in the world right now, like we are moving toward the CBDC realm, and like I guess when CBDC is being launched, because Indonesia currently are considering of that kind of CBDC, and especially trying to copy of whatever China is doing, which is a bit scary. And like, so I think what we see from history is that whatever economical mishap that happened, people will opt out for harder money, whether it's gold, real estate, or like you can see it from the Dutch Empire to the British Empire to the US Empire. In Indonesia, people will opt out to like harder type of money. So I think whether CBDC will be released, it's actually a net positive for Indonesia, because it will actually kind of bring more adoption to Bitcoin if people kind of see what's been happening.
Yeah, I think you make a great case, and it really is that simple, right? Just the money that is least manipulable or least corruptible or most resistant to change. It's like the most boring money wins, because that's really what you want. You want your money to be boring and safe and sound and resistant to all the risk in the world. There's enough risk in the world. It's like you're going into the market taking a lot of risk in terms of your capital, your reputation, your ideas, in some cases your life, depending on what job you're doing. And the fruits of that labor, you want to be able to store that in something that's insulated from risk. That's what money is. So it seems somewhat obvious that people are just going to wake up to this reality about Bitcoin, especially as governments get more and more aggressive on property right violations. People will move into the property that's hardest to violate.
Yeah. And when government cannot confiscate it, They cannot take away your property. This is when, like, what you always mention in your show, like, your individual sovereignty is just gonna flourish, right? And everyone, it's just like, I think the basis of everyone livelihood is safety, and then just to ensure that you already store your wealth and your fruit of your labor in a safe container that is cannot be confiscated, that actually can propel more innovation and propel more like a better civilization, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah. You're incentivizing responsibility at the individual level.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't have that, you just don't have a stable society.
Yeah.
Beautiful. So should we talk about Indonesia? You said Indonesia is currently at a crossroads with CBDC or Bitcoin?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I meant. Like, there's a choices between people, whether they want to use the CBDC or they can use Bitcoin. Even though right now, when it comes to like legal sense, and this is also quite interesting in Indonesia. So Bitcoin is not allowed as a legal tender in Indonesia because the legal tender is Rupiah, right? They have this law being passed in 2017. So, but the Indonesia government see Bitcoin as a commodity and is being, let's say, regulated under the Ministry of Commerce. And there are like more and more interesting development happening in Bitcoin, right? Like we all see now a lot of like US governor trying talk about Bitcoin. There's a lot like bill passed in the US about Bitcoin. El Salvador adopting Bitcoin. Russia is considering like Bitcoin mining. So Bitcoin now has gained interest in the nation level, right? And it's just like, I think back to your point again, like Indonesian people currently have the option, like whether they want to use Bitcoin or they what is it called? They just follow whatever the government said. So the choice is there, and the choice people can start choosing now. And this is why I meant by the crossroad, like whether they what kind of future as Indonesian, like what kind of future that we want Indonesia to be. Like, do you want to follow the same kind of a pattern as what Ray Dalio mentioned, or we go to completely the unknown? But it is there's like some kind of an assurance that it won't repeat the same mistake that the money predecessors have been made, which is the fiat money.
Right. Is there any indication of what the Indonesian central bank intends to do about digital currencies? Have they announced that they plan to launch their own CBDC, or where does that stand?
They are still doing like some kind of a research. They say that they want to launch it for quite a long time right now. They've been talking about how like they're going to use the CBDC as a form of settlement, or also as part of like retail. So it can be mixed between like the China form of CBDC or the like maybe the CBDC that is being proposed by the EU, let's say. So it is there, and the central banks really want to release this, just because, as we know from the reality that people don't have bank account, and the central bank wants to be able to spread more rupiah, I guess, to Indonesian and digitalize everything. So this is also the question of the the power play between the US and then China, and yeah, I guess it's very interesting where we're going to see, because uh, a lot of people said that China will rise as the next power, but it's also debatable because we see what happening right now with their own domestic problems. So yeah.
Yeah, it's very much a crossroad. And just an interesting time to be alive, but certainly seems like we have the tools available to break this cycle once and for all, as long as we choose correctly. So that's where I think education is just so critically important. Dea, I've really enjoyed this conversation. I think I've learned a lot, actually. And that is, I really enjoy that process. So thank you. We'll do this again. I know there's more to get into, so we'll put a button on it here, but could you please let my audience know where they can find out more about you or your work?
Okay. Thank you so much as well. I really enjoyed doing this research. When you hit me up, I was like, okay, I need to do research. And I actually quite enjoying it, like reading all of this thing.
Awesome.
So yeah, thank you for inviting me. For everyone that wants to find me, like they can follow me on Twitter, Dea Rezkitha. If you want to also listen to my podcast, you can go to my Bitcoin Story podcast on Spotify. And then if you happen to know any Indonesian, or you are Indonesian who would like to learn more about Bitcoin, yeah, you can visit the kelasbitcoin.com and also follow Indonesia Bitcoin community on Telegram.
Wonderful. And we'll link to all that in the show notes. Dea, thank you again. This was great.
Thank you. Thank you so much.